and they have typically 3 or 4 patients to see a day. And I was just looking at them smiling, saying, "You feel you're busy?" Because in the National Health Service in England, a resident like you would have 15 to 30 patients to see a day. And so you believe you're busy, but in reality you are not busy. You're
And
not
they're
busy.
too busy telling themselves, right? They keep telling themselves, I'm
They've been
busy.
telling themselves that they're busy because that's what they expect in that environment. That's what most of them expect. So they think they're busy. But I also tell them, if you see 3 patients a day, you will never be as good as somebody who sees 30 patients a day.
Yeah.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
You will always be less competent than somebody who sees 30 patients a day. And so when you're in hospital, your objective is to see as many patients and as many and the most complex patients. Because if you go to the gym and you lift heavy weights, you develop muscle. If you don't, you have little muscle. So similar to performance, what you've said is just really, really on the point, and I've really learned a lot from you. I wanted to also see your thoughts about high performance and getting people to use their hearts rather than, because we are very much evidence-based in a lot of fields, including medicine, and data-driven performance for data and all this other brain. And I wondered, what is your own experience of getting people to perform, but using emotions? And that's something which I've found, and I personally also quite effective. Trying to understand where people come from and knowing their story, and then appealing to the story. So for healthcare, it's patients. Once you tell a patient story, everybody in healthcare moves. If you give them data, they will listen to the data and say, thank you very much, and go and think about it. I don't know what your thoughts are about that.
No, it's super powerful. And, part of that is around, obviously, with elements of the brain like the amygdala, right? The emotional centers. We know that those centers have driven a lot of our behavior for thousands and thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, right? And why that is so critical is because of the fact that it allows us, I think, to be able to, it relates a lot to storytelling, right? The great stories are the emotional triggers. They're the ones that pull the emotional triggers, right? And so we know through history that humans have learned through stories. And the reason why stories can be powerful is that they evoke certain emotions. And if certain emotions, if you work backwards on that cycle, evoke certain thoughts. They evoke certain beliefs. So, sometimes you can hear a story which does not resonate with you, right? We've all had that experience, right? Someone's saying something and you think, I'm just going to scroll up on this Instagram story. It's rubbish, right? It doesn't have any sort of relevance to me. But then someone else will actually deliver the same message, but they'll say it in a way where they've said something that just triggered an emotional reaction in you. And that is a belief system, right? Typically. At the end of the day, Emmanuel, my general sense is that we are more similar than we are different. Right? The underlying values that we have, we generally share, I think are fairly consistent, around stability and security, around growth and happiness, around feeling loved and a sense of belonging, right? These things are generally shared amongst people. They did some research on, a slight tangent, but they did this research on, the mass shootings in the US, right? And they looked at who are these individuals that are typically doing this. And they are individuals who have lost contact with the communities in which they are in. They don't have a sense of belonging or identity, right, that is attached to them. Why else would you go into a school and go and shoot those kids, right, if you felt a sense of connection or belonging to that community? And as a result of that, right, I feel, when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it used to be that food was at the very bottom, food, shelter, basic sort of stuff, right, that you need to look at. Social connection was in the middle, right? My sense is that there are situations where it is actually reversed, where social belonging is on the foundation. And I can prove it right? By saying, Emmanuel, would you be willing to give up food for a couple of days so that someone in your community could live?
I'll answer you, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. So you start flipping things around. You can see that actually that sense of belonging can sometimes replace even just immediate needs that you feel like you might have, right? So imagine if we don't feel a sense of belonging or a connection, right, to something, and this pulls on the emotional triggers that you were talking about, the emotional sort of story, right? That's how powerful the storytelling approach is. Good stories don't focus on data, right? Even when you're selling in a merger and acquisition, we work with investment banks, right? The best M&A deals are done because the other person feels safe taking the purchase, right?
well,
Not that they think safety, they feel safe through the process, right? So, in a world that is completely number driven, people are still making decisions based on emotion. And
interesting.
I think that part for me is interesting. The other part is the science tells us there are neurons in your heart, there are neurons in your gut. This is called braining, multiple braining, right? I mean, you know this better than me. So the idea that our systems remember certain things, right? So this is why, for example, if you were to get people to change their behavior, right? One of the best ways to do that is to pull on a story or an emotion or a belief that they have, right? That triggers an emotional reaction. And because of that, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard parents who have given up smoking because they've had kids, right? They've known all along smoking is bad for them intellectually, right? But as soon as a child comes into the scene, right, all of a sudden that has to change. So it's not an accident that we operate this way. And again, this is helpful when you're leading a team, when you are working with a team. How do you get people to see a side of a story, to help the greater good, right? And I think playing with that emotional concept is helpful.
Now, we're coming to the hour, and it's really been an honor and a pleasure having this conversation. And I'm sure all our listeners have had so much benefit from this conversation. And before we start rounding up, I wondered whether there was anything else you wanted to share before we start rounding up.
Yeah, I firstly thank you, Emmanuel. I think it's so wonderful what you're doing, not just in your your professional career, but vocationally, in terms of what you're doing here as well. We live in a very, very what we call a VUCA world, right? That volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world. One of the things that I found is that when we struggle the most is when we feel we're out of control. So anything that we can do to bring that sense of control back to ourselves is going to be really important. There are things that we can control. There are things we can influence. There are things that we should not even be bothered about. We spend way too much time on the things that we should not even be bothered about. So I think from a mental health perspective, from a success and dealing with struggle perspective, bring back the things that are in your control. Write them down, go and do them. That's going to be one of the best ways to kind of manage, the situation. So I feel like that's one of the do's, right, of kind of managing situations.
Absolutely. And then perhaps I don't.
Don't start by asking everybody else around you for what you need to do. Explore within yourself first, right? Ask some questions of yourself first, right? Because there are always going to be different opinions, and everyone has lived a different life to you. No one in the history of mankind has lived your life, sees the world through your lens, right? And so we need to sometimes trust ourselves in terms of what we have experienced. Doesn't mean that you don't go and ask them later, right? In terms of what you might do. But we should not be afraid to ask ourselves first, what is happening to me? What am I thinking? right? How is that causing me to feel? What have been the behaviors that have helped me and been unhelpful to me? So I think, don't think the answer lies always outside of yourself. Challenge yourself to question yourself deeper.
And that is so profound. And I started off the podcast introduction saying we're on a mission to change lives, and the gifts of wisdom you've just shared there, I'm confident will change people's lives. For all our listeners, things will only change if you take action and apply them. So if you listen and you don't do anything about it, there won't be any change. Today has been a fascinating episode. I have so many light bulbs still lit, and that I have to find some time to switch off before I go to bed today, because you've kept me thinking throughout, and all our listeners, I'm sure you've kept them thinking. You've seen a introduction of what a high performance coach can do to help with improving performance. And so I also want to really take some time just to, again, highlight your consultancy called Compass Consultancy, which we'll also put in the text description of the podcast. So people, organizations, individuals, organization teams that could benefit from your consultancy, your service, can reach out to you. I also want to thank Talent and Truth, who I would, and before I finish, really just to explain how we got to this podcast, because I received an email from Talent and Truth saying they'd listened to a previous podcast that was done with Dr. Monty Morgan, and it was really fascinating and interesting, and proposed that I also invite you, and how good it was that I took that offer, and I'm blessed with the fact that that they asked me to do this, because it's been a fascinating episode. I've learned so much, and I'm sure the listeners have learned so much. So once more, Gaj, thank you for being so generous in sharing information today and your wisdom. This is what the podcast is about: helping people turn struggles into success and learning from others' experience. And your expertise is really wonderful. So thank you for what you do. And for all our listeners, I look forward to the next episode. And if you also have other people who you want to propose for me to invite to join the podcast, please do. This is what we do: invite people to join the podcast, share, and help to change your life and other people's life. And Gaj, I'll give you an opportunity for final words, and then I'll close.
I think it's wonderful, Emmanuel. I really appreciate what you are doing. And I think one of the key things is, for me, anything that I can do to support your community, I think sometimes for me, it's a privilege getting invited into, everyone's different communities, right? And there's a sense of belonging that comes from that. And I take that as a very serious and very kind gesture, that you have extended to me. And anything that I can do to support your community, by all means, for people to reach out to me, always happy to support and help. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again. And to all our listeners, keep sharing, subscribe, spread the word, follow. And we on a mission to make this podcast viral. We're at 2,000 subscribers. Hopefully the next time we meet, we're increasing by tenfold every month. So no pressure.